this is going to be a summary of some of the things that have really popped for me just in the last year about cover crops. And this title slide is a scene from a orchard in Florida with cover crops. It's from an article in a popular magazine, fairly popular, popular rather than scientific, Civil Eats. The title of the article was "Can Cover Crops Save Florida Citrus?" This is the subject of study for several researchers, farm advisors with the University of Florida, and I'll mention those later, but the whole overall theme of what I'm going to present about cover crops is what is coming to be understood as a very exciting potential role for helping trees be healthy enough to produce marketable fruit. So when we talk about, cover crops is a part of a category that the Dietrick Institute has always referred to as habitat enhancement. So besides the cover crop per se, which you see, let me see, do I have my pointer? Maybe.
Yep, it's visible.
It's working, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so then we have green manure, hedgerows and berms, as Michael calls it, interplantings, and I see Steve Sprinkle is attending now. He was probably out bundling hundreds of bundles of kale this morning, but he sent me yesterday this picture of the farm where he's working right now with 400 feet of cilantro that he's letting go to seed for habitat and seed. And this bottom slide is my father, Everett J. Dietrick, in what we call a pest break strip. And I just want to describe that really briefly. It's across 30, there are 3 of these interplantings across 30 acres of lima beans on Santa Rosa Road, west of Buellton, where that farmer had been spraying for spider mites, as a necessity. But with these strips, which included alfalfa, clover, grasses, and a lot of corn, as you can see, some sunflowers that the grower simply liked in there, and also sorghum. There were no mite problems except like right back here. The mites would come in through the Santa Ynez Valley from the ocean this direction, and these pest break strips are just so full of natural enemies that that we didn't have mite problems except over on these far edges where the field wasn't protected. So that is just, the farmscape is what we're looking at. As far as resources on cover crops, I was impressed with what CAF and Farmers Guild presents here. You can find that easily Googling, and I just want to point to this bottom right cover crops database, which is, it was overwhelming 15 years ago with all the work that Dr. Robert Bugg did, and you can find a lot of stuff about cover crops. So there is an earlier experiment, but I'm just going to tell a story that I learned from Dr. Christine Jones, soil scientist from Australia, and she raised my awareness about the Jena Experiment in Germany. And it's a long-standing experiment where they're still collecting data, and a lot of sorry, I'm moving my notes forward here. And now I need to move quickly, so I'll just say, well, they had like 10 by 10 plots, and they were measuring the impact of biodiversity on many different measures. And so they had blocks with 2 species, 4 species, 8 species, and 16 species of, and always a mix with some legumes, grasses, and forbs. And then they also did replicates with no nitrogen added, with 100 pounds and with 200 pounds per acre of nitrogen, and then measured. They even used isotopes to measure the carbon, new carbon, old carbon, and definitely biomass and nitrogen in the leaves and so on. And the big take home is that the more that when you get up to the 16 species, you just 8 species has a higher yield and then 16 species has an even higher yield. Jena Experiment has a wonderful 8-minute video online, and I did a screen capture of these, a couple of slides from that. Shoot, where's my mouse? Here we go. So on the left, you have a kind of graphic of the less diversity, and then the more diversity, and it's depicting this greater amount of water retention and life below ground and above ground. Then they also depict here with the less amount of carbon of soil building right here, and then much greater soil building the more species that you have in the plant community. And these little colored bubbles represent the number and diversity of different nitrogen compounds. Then let me see. So the big take home, and this slide is actually, I screen captured it from Christine Jones' talk that she gave last year to the No-Till on the Plains conference. It's a 1-hour talk I recommend. It's called Community Tipping Points. High diversity plots, that means over 8 species, accumulated 21.8% more carbon compared with low diversity plots with 1, 2, or 4 plant species. Then Christine takes us through some other places that she's either consulted for or visited. In this place in North Dakota, they did a full-on research study where the single species, the oilseed radish, I think this was during a drought. I'm getting the stories a little confused, yeah. But then they measured like 2 species, 3, 4, and 5 species mixes that she says all failed. But look at the 6-way mix. That's this is the theme of Christine's presentations. In Alberta, a similar story, and this was definitely during a really unprecedented drought, no rain, no irrigation. The triticale monoculture was just not, you know, worse than pathetic. But when you put when you put these other 8 species with the triticale, you want to just go roll in it. So then she takes us to a farm that she's visited more than once, the Willith Farm in New Zealand. You see on the upper left, the type of soil is a pumice soil. This farmer, she says, dairying was just a sideline. His passion was to grow topsoil. That's what he really wanted to do. And so she said, well, the first thing you need to do to grow topsoil is to stop applying high levels of nitrogen, and just like work on your cover crops and use biostimulants instead of nitrogen. So you see here with the ryegrass and clover and the biostimulants, he was getting like 6 inches, 5-6 inches of topsoil. And you see the rest is the pumice. Now, right, and I can just hear Ben saying to me, it rains there. Yeah, but it's still an interesting story, because then when he went to this paddock and put in 12 species, and this is, and Christine wants to make sure you understand, this area, this is 3 years with no added nitrogen. And in the background, all of that background is just the ryegrass and the clover with biostimulants. And look at that. And then when they dug up soil all over this paddock, and they were finding 12 inches of topsoil in 5 months. So the benefits at the Willow Farm, the cation exchange up 50%, all nutrients increased with nothing added, total organic carbon tripled in the top 8 inches, and even greater at a deeper level, and all kinds of benefits for the cows that eat that pasture. So what the summary of this is that living plants, living roots, support microbes that create this well-structured, pliable topsoil that's healthy and holds water. Let me just go flipping through my notes to make sure I'm not missing. I don't have a slide that drives this home, but it was the liquid carbon pathway concept that Christine presents that also seemed really special to me. And I think it's something we should talk more about, that here are these plants, with their leaves as like solar panels collecting the carbon dioxide and turning it into this like food going through the phloem and out the roots, as we've seen. But to think of it as a liquid carbon pathway, I think is a nice image. So what she's saying is the presence of year-long, so more or less perennial is best, but diverse ground cover is the most important factor for soil health. So now back to Florida, and one of those extension agents looking at with some cooperator groves there, Juanita Popence says that with cover crops and fertility, you can still produce good fruit even if they have HLB. Let me see if, yes, she says, like, right now, there's not enough data available to recommend cover crops as a way to address citrus greening, but she says it looks good. One of her cooperators, Ed James, says it's not one size fits all with cover crops. He uses 5 different species in his groves: sun hemp, hairy indigo, Alice clover, and several brassicas, including daikon radish, weed radish, and mustard. That makes a messy cover. It's not what a whole lot of growers want to be associated with, but they are observing that the trees are healthy and producing marketable fruit. So why not put some flowers in there and make that crazy mix of brassicas more beautiful? And we have the University of California to thank for doing a study on 43 native California plants. Jim also presented his wonderful matrix of something blooming each time of year, and that was one of the criteria for this study. They also wanted drought tolerance, and these are California natives. So there's a lot out there, and there's like way more to learn about what would be, as Jim said, the best choices for our purposes of supporting the natural enemies of ACP. But let me, moving right along. And I just to say, like what we've already heard, that ants don't like to be covered. They like bare, compacted, often along in the drive road next to vegetated or irrigated areas. That's all. You know, it's just there's a relationship there between cover crops and ants. All right, so but we want to look at the soil here. So this is an idea that, again, I thank Christine Jones for introducing me. Now that I'm talking about it everywhere I go for the last year. Some people already knew about this, but every species produces a unique signal. And these chemical signals, they're called autoinducers. And it's when this concentration of autoinducers in the environment reaches a critical level, they regulate gene expression in the microbial population or in plant and animal hosts. You know, I can't help thinking about how we must all be thinking about what's happening inside ourselves with this new novel virus, and what is the gene expression going on that will translate into how our lungs respond to the invasion. Microbes sense that they have a quorum. Autoinducers make these genes turn on. So the aha that I got from what Christine was saying is that the bacteria that causes HLB isn't expressing virulence until there's a quorum. So bacteria can be present without virulence. And you know, this is theoretical in citrus, but I'm just, to me, it connects the dots with the other kinds of observations that especially you'll be hearing next from Srivanas and Stephen. So it's the tree's immune system that governs whether that quorum is present that auto-induces the gene expression for virulence. People can correct me if I'm wrong, because I am not an expert on this, and I'm just so intrigued by what Dr. Jones has been sharing, mostly to the growers in the Midwest of the U.S. and Canada, and I'm just want to put it out there. Okay, she refers a lot to the studies. There's like a couple dozen, I guess, studies coming out of the Jena experiment, and this is kind of wonky, but you know, I'm just pointing to, like, this line goes up, this line goes up. These are measures of carbon relative to species diversity, and this one is really illustrative of this tipping point. Now, I'm asking every expert I can find at farmer meetings, how many species do you think it takes to make that tipping point where you really start to accelerate high performance biology in soil? And Christine thinks it's 16. And I think this chart from this study shows why, because like it's right in here where we start to see this like accelerated you know, accumulation of what in here is called microbial carbon. And note here that the dots are microbial carbon, whereas the bars are your fine root carbon. Anyway, enough on that. I could, you know, I just made this graph because this is not based on any scientific data, but I just, based on these other observations, I wanted to simplify this hypothesis. I won't even say it's true, but what what Christine is presenting, especially with regard to this tipping point here, somewhere, so 2 species, 4 species, 8 species, 16, and so I've seen some graphs that go just straight without the tipping point, but what Christine is, you know, I'm not an expert, I'm studying this, right in this, 12 to 16 species, there's an acceleration of soil carbon. And whereas this brown line is how it's damaged by the addition of artificial nitrogen. So it's just a way of trying to tell the story. So back to Christine's talking points, all of these genes can be influenced by quorum sensing in the embedded and surrounding microbial populations. This is so interesting. And I want to get my my notes about this. I think I skipped over one slide too, but I'll talk about this. So this seed was inoculated and it's already exuding sticky glue stuff, aggregating soil before it even has leaves. And this is what we're looking for, is this kind of soil aggregation. So sterile seed, the seed apparently doesn't even know which way is up. So, it's just another way of saying how important the biology is. Plant root inputs build soil carbon 5 times faster than carbon derived from above ground biomass, which is, I think, along the lines of what Ben was saying about cover crops versus mulch. And I think most of the scientists would say that, and just generally that you will get, more carbon from cover crops than your applications of compost or mulch, and that they can't do that when you're putting a lot of nitrogen on the soil. So I want to draw everyone's attention to this wonderful program funded by the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund by the state of California, the Healthy Soils Program, and the incentives program in particular, that pays growers to do practices that sequester carbon and reduce GHGs, improve soil health, and all these practices that we're talking about. And we're in a new grant round, and they've greatly improved the program. It was a pain in the neck when it launched, but they've had a lot of complaints and they've fixed a lot of it. Apparently, if you know what you want to do, you can fill out that application in about 30 minutes, according to Jamie Whiteford, who is helping people in our county do these applications. And so it's easy to find that page. I maybe Brett will be able to put that in the chat. So I'm about out of time. I want to just quickly just say, some people don't believe in talking to farmers about climate change, but I just think it's time to, like Greta says, tell the truth. And in the case of this purple area, it's like 2/3 of the GHGs from agriculture are from what this ATRA study calls soil management, but what I would call soil depletion. So there are, in wrapping it up, some concerns about cover crops and citrus, the amount of water. The seedsmen say that sell a lot of cover crops, say generally around 10% more water. But has there been hard studies on the whole cost benefit for water and what water is saved from the rain capture and the influence on soil and canopy temperature? Then we can have a discussion with Greg about that covers and your market crop are taking nutrients out of the field that need to be replaced. There is a lot of nutrient nutrient cycling keeps going with more species, but is that enough? So that's a question. And then native plant seed is very expensive, but what's the long-term benefit of that? And then you have other issues with people who, you know, you have to look at what you're planting, that it's not attracting something you don't want. There are definitely issues with gophers, and I've been on a field day where the main reason that the grower, it was avocados, didn't want to do cover crops was the rattlesnakes. So things to be managed. So I don't know if we want to just take one. Is there one or two? One question. Can you help Brett with?
Yeah, sure. There's a question from Greg Stevenson, or it's more of a comment that cover crops seem to be at odds with a thick layer of mulch. Both seem beneficial but mutually exclusive, and that mulch would suppress the cover crop growth. If you have any, or if anyone has any thoughts or considerations on that.
I would have the same question. I don't know if Ben wants to pipe in on that, but yeah, it's a lot. You know, what I think I wanted to present was hypotheses that I don't know that they haven't been tried in citrus, so, or even orchard crops in California that much. You know, Greg has some experience, but I just think that I'm really glad that our local extension people are participating in the webinar to kind of like see this whole array of questions that and what are the biggest values that we could get in terms of some trials.
Jan, this is Ben Faber.
Yeah.
One of the largest cover cropper in this whole county is Limonera.
Right.
And there's everything that they can cover crop, they cover crop, and they mulch as well, but they probably do more cover cropping than mulching.
Wow. So, gosh, we were out there about 6 weeks ago, and Edgar didn't show us that. So we're going to definitely be going back and visiting.
Yeah, right along 126 between Kimball and Briggs.
Okay.
All that new planting is all cover cropped.
Oh,
this
my
is Jim.
God.
Ben, do they cover crop as in between the rows or the whole surface?
They plant on berms, and so they plant in the alleys in between the rows. So they get in there so that they can mow it.
Yeah, I see. But the berms are clean where the trees are. They keep that fairly clean.
They put mulch on top of the berms to protect the berms from eroding from what rain we get.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
also, this is Greg. You also have to, you always have to compromise, and so you got to compromise with, we're in a Mediterranean climate and we're growing the crops. So what we do is that we mow them, we grow them as much as we can in the winter and spring, and then we mow them, and then we end up with a dry mulch in the summer. And some weeds do pop through and things, but pretty much they don't get going. They'll mow them several times, and then they harvest their crop in the fall, and then we'll fertilize, and then the winter annuals come up again. And also that drives the beneficials. When you mow them, that dries and they move up into the trees, and some pests can do that too.
Maybe in the discussion I can find this slide where my father did this research in 1960 that showed the different ways of mowing, and that strip mowing versus full mowing, it had a 2 to 20-fold difference in the conservation of natural enemies. So
That would help.
This could be a whole day webinar on what's known about managing cover crops in other areas. And the other thing that triggers in my mind, Greg, is when we did the field day at Eco Farm to Dr. Eric Brennan's 40-acre research. He's the only organic researcher in the USDA ARS, and his passion is cover crops. And most of his energy and focus seemed to be on the equipment for managing the cover. His is in row crops, mostly strawberries, but he had a full-time mechanic on the grant or on the project, testing subsurface cutters and flail mowers and and I can envision in the future like some entity like the RCD or even the Farm Bureau, organizing a cooperative for new equipment and somebody that could actually customize equipment that growers can try out, because it's a big investment, and we don't know what's really going to work, but we could probably really accelerate cover crop installation with that support of the different ways of managing it.
The mulch can be used in the tree row, especially when the canopy closes, where you don't get much light underneath the trees, and then cover crop in between the tree rows would be a good combination.
I think that's great.